Friends, today's story is full of tension. It's about a newlywed couple on their honeymoon who soon begin to pray for their own end. Bea and Paul have finally tied the knot after a long, loving relationship. They still remember the first time they met in a little cafe, exchanging shy smiles over steaming cups of coffee. And from that day on, their meetings became the best part of each other's lives. Now they're off to a remote cottage in the forest for their honeymoon, a special place that once belonged to Bea's father, but has been empty for years. The plan is simple. Spend a few quiet months together, exploring the antique trinkets and faded photographs packed into every corner of the old house. By the time they arrive, both of them are exhausted from the long drive. Paul collapses into bed as soon as he can, and sleep takes him immediately. But then, in the middle of the night, a strange beam of light dances across his face, like someone is playing with a flashlight just beyond the window. What could it be? We're about to find out. The next morning, Paul spots an old bear skin draped over a chair and asks Bea about it. She explains that her father loved to hunt and brought the bear home after he killed it, then tanned its skin. Paul shivers at the thought. He's not much of a brave soul, so he teases, "Have you ever hunted anyone yourself?" Bea laughs and shakes her head. "Only fish," she says, grinning. They both laugh so hard their sides ache. After breakfast, they rent a small boat and glide across the lake, laughing and pointing at the tall pines along the shore. The water is icy cold, though, so Paul decides to skip swimming for now. Later, they wander over to a little lakeside restaurant, but the door is locked. Curious, Paul pushes it open anyway, and they step inside. The place is dusty, and the single bulb overhead flickers on and off, casting strange shadows. Suddenly, a man steps out from the kitchen. "It's closed," he says gruffly, waving them away. Just as he turns to leave, he does a double take. "Bea," he asks, "is that really you?" Bea blinks, then recognition floods her face. "Will, it's been years," she cries, and they hug tightly, memories of their childhood games flooding back. Paul laughs at their reunion, happy to see Bea so surprised. Before they can catch their breath, a woman appears behind Will. She looks pale and moves in an odd, jerky way. "You shouldn't be here," she whispers, eyes darting nervously. Will steps between her and the couple. "She isn't well," he tells Bea and Paul gently, then guides his wife back into the darkened kitchen, closing the door behind them. That evening, they finally made it back to the cottage. But when Bea walked in, Paul noticed she seemed tense, probably still shaken by Annie's strange behavior. He nudged her gently. "Cheer up," he teased. "Maybe Annie was just your old boyfriend playing a joke." Bea couldn't help laughing at that, and soon they were both drifting off to sleep. At morning, Paul's alarm buzzed. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and frowned at the clock. It was nearly midnight. "Weird," he muttered, realizing he must have set the alarm by mistake. He climbed back under the covers, assuming Bea was in the bathroom, and fell asleep again. An hour later, he woke and reached out to brush away her hair, but the bed was empty. Panic fluttered in his chest. He called her name, then tore through every room of the cottage. No sign of Bea. Grabbing his jacket, he rushed outside into the dark forest. What he saw stopped him cold. There on the leaf-strewn ground lay Bea, completely without clothes. Heart pounding, he scooped her into his arms and carried her back inside. "What happened?" he asked, wrapping her in a blanket. Bea's eyelids fluttered open. "I'm fine," she said softly. "I must have been sleepwalking." Paul stared at her, unsettled. She gave the same answer for every question about how she ended up in the woods naked, that she was all right and didn't remember leaving the bed. He couldn't rest that night, haunted by the image of her alone in the dark. In the morning, he watched her closely. Bea moved slowly, her movements odd. She burned the toast and only heated the coffee water, simple mistakes she never made before. When he gently suggested she see a doctor, she just smiled and said she was tired, like somehow her body had run out of energy for no reason. Paul's worry only deepened. Early the next morning, Paul and Bea pack up their fishing gear and head down to the lake. Paul's laughter fills the air as he teases a small frog out of the reeds, one of Bea's favorite little creatures. But today she stays silent, staring at the water without her usual smile. Paul's chest tightens at the odd change. Noting her mood, he suggests a quick swim to wake up. But even though Bea hates the icy water, she steps in without a word. Paul's unease grows. So many shifts in her behavior in just a single night. He wants to insist on a doctor's visit, but Bea waves him off. "I'm completely fine," she says, brushing his concern aside. Later, as they sit by the shore, Paul leans in to kiss her and notices clusters of small wounds on her feet, too big for mosquitoes. "These don't look like bug bites," he says softly. "Maybe something larger bit you. Let's see a doctor." Bea sighs and stands. "I'm just sleepy," she says. "I need to rest." She walks back to the cottage and drifts off. Once she's fast asleep, Paul gently cleans her wounds and realizes she's right. These aren't mosquito bites. He slips out into the dark woods, retracing his steps to where he'd found her before. There, half hidden under leaves, he finds her favorite nightgown, the one he gave her, stained with a strange, sticky liquid. Around it, he spots footprints too large to be hers. He shivers at the thought that she wasn't alone those nights. When he finally makes his way back, Paul hears soft voices coming from the bathroom. Pushing the door open, he sees B standing before the mirror, practicing the words she plans to say to him. That night, Paul asks B to join him in bed and wear the same nightgown she always loves. She tells him she already put it in the washing machine. He leans in to kiss her, but she suddenly pulls away. Paul feels a cold knot in his stomach. This isn't the B he knows. Everything about her has changed, and he's scared and confused. He keeps asking why she won't act like herself, but her answers make no sense. What really happened to B? You'll soon discover something that will shock you. Later that night, Paul sees B slip out of the cottage again. He waits for her to come back, and when she does, she simply says she went to get a drink of water. Just then, he notices a flickering light moving in the trees, the same strange beam they saw on their very first night here. Thinking someone is outside, Paul grabs his gun and steps into the dark. He follows the light through the woods until he glimpses something just ahead. Whatever it was, he's so startled he fires a warning shot into the air and races back to the cottage. B hears the shot and rushes to the door, telling him to stay inside and never go out again. Paul can't hold back any longer. He demands to know if she was with someone else that night. After all, he found many footprints in the forest. B's only answer is that she must have been sleepwalking. She doesn't remember leaving the bed. He even asks about Will, hoping for a clue, but she brushes him off the same way. Then Paul shows her the ripped, stained gown he found in the woods. Watching his face, B gives him another round, confusing answer instead of the truth. Paul's anger flares and they argue fiercely. B finally tells him he's worrying too much and wasting both their time. But Paul is lost. He still doesn't know what's really happening or why B won't tell him the simple, true answers he seeks. That night, their argument grows so fierce that Bea and Paul end up sleeping in separate rooms. The next morning, we see Bea hunched over a diary, writing in shaky letters. "My name is Bea. My husband is Paul. This is our honeymoon." She pauses, confused, and glances around as if she doesn't quite remember who she is. She hides the diary as Paul enters. It slips from her hand and lands on his bandaged arm, where the wound is now inflamed and painful. Paul, alarmed by how badly his injury has worsened, tells her to leave at once. Bea refuses, insisting she has to stay. To lift their spirits, they set out in a small rowboat on the nearby lake. The quiet water and soft breeze seem to calm them, and they grow close again. But when Paul notices fresh blood on Bea's shorts, his worry returns. Bea brushes it off, her period, but Paul checks his watch and realizes it isn't that time of the month. He suddenly feels faint. Desperate for answers, Paul makes his way to Annie's cabin. "Where's Will?" he demands. Annie's eyes dart around. She whispers, "He's hiding." Then she slips away in her own boat. Paul rows a short distance and spots something floating near the reeds. Will's baseball cap stained bright red. Fear seizes him. Back at Annie's house, he spots security cameras and hurries inside. On the monitor, Annie is following the same strange glowing light that Paul saw before. On a small table, he finds a torn piece of paper. "My name is Annie. My husband is Will. Extra." The paper is wet with the same sticky fluid that stained Bea's dress. Paul races home, heart pounding. In his bedroom, he sees Bea standing alone, pressing a small, jagged object against herself. Blood streams down her leg. When she catches sight of him, she rushes forward, fumbling with rope and trying to pin him to the bed. Paul wrestles her hands free and, in a sudden burst of strength, ties her to the bedpost. Bea, tears in her eyes, trembles as she whispers, "If you let me bind you, you'll finally understand and surrender to me." Paul steps back, stunned. "You're not the woman I brought here," he says, voice shaking. "You're not my wife." Bea's face twists with anguish and determination. "I am the same person," she pleads. "How else can I prove it to you?" That night, Paul presses Bea with questions about their past. Questions she can't answer because she never wrote those details in her diary. He begins to feel certain that something terrible has happened to the real Bea, that she's been replaced or deceived by someone or something else. His horror peaks when he notices movement in Bea's lower body, a small, wriggling creature emerging where no creature should be. With shaking hands, Paul grabs it and tosses it into the darkness. Whatever it was alive and not of this world. Terrified, Paul backs away and finally voices what he's been sensing for days. "There's something here, something controlling us." At that moment, Bea steps out of the shadows. Her eyes are cold and distant as she admits there's no escape. "I saw that strange light in the forest," she says in a flat, distant tone. I followed it and met them. Figures so blurry I can't even remember their faces. They did something to me inside that cave. This body you see is just a shell. When they call, I have to come. And you killed their child growing inside me. Paul reels, unable to grasp who they are or what child she means. Before he can respond, a beam of pale light washes over Bia. A distant echoing voice says, "We don't need Paul anymore." Bia's face flickers with something that isn't her own, and she strikes Paul hard. He collapses unconscious. When Paul comes to in the gray dawn, he finds himself bound to a small boat washed up on Lee's beach. Bia stands at the shore, her eyes empty. "They punished you for what you did," she murmurs, and before he can plead, shoves him into the cold water. Paul sinks beneath the waves and his struggle ends. Days later, we find Bia seated in her living room, watching her wedding video alone. The corners of her mouth twitch into a sad, empty smile. Annie appears at the door, voice distant. "They're calling us again." Without a word, the two women step into the night, following that same unearthly glow. As they move, their skin seems to peel away, revealing something new forming beneath, something not quite human. And then the screen fades to black. Who were the strangers in the forest? Did they steal Bia's soul, cast a dark spell, or are they a hidden species that uses women as vessels to multiply? If their power grows, might they someday control men too? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.